Hey, what's going on, everybody? David Noe with SpeakEasy HR, presented by Payroll Partners. It is episode 33. I cannot believe it. It's May 19th, and we are sliding into the summer. Everyone's getting ready to maybe go on vacation. But today, I'm talking with an awesome guest on a really fun topic. I've got Neil Thompson, founder of Teach the Geek. He's a podcast host. He's an author. So, Neil, welcome to SpeakEasy HR.
Thanks for having me, David.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we are live on LinkedIn and YouTube. So, if you are watching, I enjoy interaction. I enjoy people asking questions to me and the guest. So, for those of you who are new to SpeakEasy HR, welcome. Thanks for hanging out with us and spending time on your busy Monday. I started this last year in July, and I'm coming up on almost a year. So I've had some incredible guests, got a lot lined up in the future. So take a look at speakeasyhr.com. I have a weekly blog out, and through May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So I've got one today on compassion. So if you go out there to Speakeasy HR under the blog section, you can get to that. So, Neil, I want to hear more about your background and everything that you've done up to this point. So, wanted to ask you a few questions. We're going to play the envelope icebreaker game that everyone enjoys to play. So, again, if you are watching live, please engage with us, ask questions. We'll get to them as we see them come through. So, Neil, if you want to start and kind of tell people about you, we've connected over the last few months as we planned out this episode, but people that don't know much about you, your podcast, Teach the Geek, kind of walk us through what you're into these days.
Sure. I worked as the product development engineer in the medical device industry for several years, although my first job was as a research associate at a small startup. A lot of the work that I did was in a lab, doing the experiments and writing up the protocols and reports. And I'd pass off anything that I generated to my boss, and he'd be the one that had to disseminate it to everybody. And I didn't mind that arrangement one bit. It wasn't until I took that second job at a larger medical device company that I became a project lead. Although when I first took the job, when I was interviewing, I thought that the job was going to be very similar to the work I did as a research associate, and it was at first. But a few months into it, I was called into my boss's office, and he told me I'd be a project lead. And one of those responsibilities was giving presentations in front of management on a monthly basis. So
Hmm.
we're talking the CEO, CTO, CMO, C fill in the blank O, all the C's in this conference room staring at project leads one by one talking about their projects and the status of those projects. And those first few presentations I gave David were absolutely horrendous. I didn't know it was possible to sweat that profusely from one's body. It was as if I'd just gotten out of the shower. It was ridiculous. It was pouring from everywhere. We have fingernails, and my fingernails were wet. Fingernails don't even
Oh,
have pores. Like, how's that even possible? But yet there I was doing exactly that. And to make matters worse, after the presentations, I'd get questions that I thought I'd answered during the presentation. But obviously, I didn't do a very good job of framing things in a way that the CEO and others could understand. So if I wasn't sweating profusely during and before the presentation, then it was coming down like a downpour after the presentation.
oh,
So
wow.
this was the case for not just my first presentation, David, or my second. You would have thought I would learn my lesson after that first one, but I learned nothing. I did the same thing the second one, the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one. In fact, my project had to get canceled for me to get the point. This whole presenting in front of others thing. Maybe this is something I need to get better at, and that definitely was a wake up call. I thought
Yeah.
I would have lost my job, but luckily I was just put on to other projects. What I ended up doing was joining Toastmasters. For those of you all that don't know about it, it's an international organization with chapters all over the world, and the goal is to help people get better at public speaking. Even when I left that job and took another job elsewhere, I always was a member of a Toastmasters club in the area. And it's an excellent forum to practice those skills. And instead of trying to avoid having to give presentations like I did with that first job I had as a research associate, now I was looking for opportunities to do so because now I recognize the benefit of it. And it was that was really the catalyst for the at least the idea of where Teach the Geek came from, because it wasn't just me that wasn't all that great at giving presentations. There were other project leads, and they're all engineers too. And I was sitting on some of their presentations, and they weren't all that much better at it than I was. I saw quite a bit of sweat pouring off them too.
Yeah.
So this was definitely something that I think was needed. And
Yeah.
Teach the Geek was born maybe a few years after that, where I finally had the confidence to go full force with it. So essentially, what Teach the Geek is me as a technical person helping other technical people with their presentation skills, especially in front of non-technical audiences. You mentioned I have a podcast. It's called the Teach the Geek podcast, and it's about me speaking with other technical people, or at least people with technical backgrounds, about their public speaking journeys. I also have a YouTube channel in which I offer tips on how to get better at giving presentations. And then I blog every so often on my website, teachthegeek.com. But then another part of, I guess, of Teach the Geek is who's working with technical teams within organizations to help them get better at giving presentations. I mean, Teach the Geek started off with a course that I created called Teach the Geek to Speak. It was an online course. And initially, I was selling it directly to the technical people, but it was during the pandemic that I got the idea that maybe this is something you should approach the organizations with, because the engineers and the technical people work there. And I suspect that these people that work with these technical teams see the issues that some of them have with communicating what they know to non technical people. And so
Yeah.
that's essentially what Teach the Geek is in a nutshell.
That is very fascinating. And I was going to ask you Toastmasters because I have gone to a local chapter in the past and it definitely helped. It's been a long time since I've gone, but I think a lot of people they don't like getting in front of people and talking and having to present, and a lot of jobs require it. Obviously, there are some technical jobs, or like you said, it still requires you to get in front of people and present. And so if that's ever something that you have to do in your job or just want to get better at it, I would definitely suggest finding Toastmasters because they're all over. I'm not sure how many actual chapters you probably know, or you might have said exactly how many, but they're all over the country. I know that, right? Are they globally too?
Oh yeah, it's a global organization. They have chapters all
Yeah.
over the world. And yeah, I
Yeah.
certainly
That's
can
awesome.
see the issue that people would have, maybe even going to a Toastmasters meeting, and especially if you want to keep money in your pocket, because at some of these at some of these chapters, if you use filler words, you have to put money into a jar.
Oh, geez.
I remember
Wow.
one of the chapters I belonged to. One of the members, he used to just come in and just put $5 in the jar right when he came, because he knew that money's going to be gone by the time the meeting was over.
I've heard of a swear jar before. I haven't heard of that kind of jar, but that's fascinating. Well, no, that's great. And so going to Columbia University, biochemical engineering, and now you're doing this kind of work. So it definitely changes the trajectory of someone's career, and I think a lot of it comes from real world experience working, figuring out what you really are passionate about doing, and that's kind of when you and I connected. I kind of got to hear a little bit about what you were into and your work, and I said, what do you want to bring into Speakeasy HR as a topic, and you talked about some of the things that you could bring, and so obviously bringing that passion in talking about this, I'm really excited. Um, so anyway, I want to get to a couple of things before we dive into your topic, Neil. So you haven't played this yet, but this is something that I have every guest to come on and just as they explain their background and get the audience to hear a little bit more about them, play the world famous envelope icebreaker game. So we will get to that here after this hopefully transitions from our screen. Maybe it did. I think it did. I don't know if it went through all the way, but so you can pick a number, Neil, 1 through 15. I'll take the question out of the envelope and we'll go through it. So 1 through
Four,
15. 4?
four.
Number 4. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, number 4 is, what is your absolute dream job? There you
Hmm,
go.
my dream job.
You could do
Well,
anything, obviously outside of what you're doing now, maybe, because a lot of people say, I'm doing my dream job. I'm enjoying my job, which maybe you are. Maybe it's not something that you're doing now, but what would be your dream job?
it's something that I used to do, and I wasn't paid for it, so I don't know if it qualifies as a job. But if I was independently wealthy, I would volunteer for Meals on Wheels, delivering food to people.
Love it. Yeah, that would definitely be part of my dream job as well. I think people that financially are stable and can do that work. I love that you say that because that really is so important to do. So, all right, one more, not number four. What do you got,
Five,
Neil? One through
five.
15? Five. You're going right down the line here. All right, I love it. Number five, envelope icebreaker is, what is your favorite tradition or holiday?
Well, probably be Christmas. I remember when I was
Yeah,
a kid, especially, it wasn't even necessarily about the
yeah.
gifts because I never got what I wanted. You know, I remember when I was a kid, there would be kids at school and they'd be writing lists to Santa, and I did it one time, even sent it, put it in the mail and everything. I didn't get anything that was on that list. For the longest while, kids at school be talking about Santa, but I remember when I was a kid, there was never any gifts from Santa under the Christmas tree. There were gifts from aunts and uncles and grandparents and
Yeah,
mom and
yeah,
dad, but nothing from Santa. So I didn't know
yeah.
anything about Santa really. He's the guy at the
Right.
mall whose lap you sat on, I guess. But what I really liked
Yeah.
about Christmas was more of the food. So I had two aunts. I had two
Oh,
aunts,
yeah.
and for one of them, we'd go over to her house for Christmas breakfast, and another one we'd go over for Christmas dinner. And that's what at least those are some of the best memories from my childhood is going over to their homes during Christmas and eating until I fell
Yeah.
asleep.
That's awesome. Very good. All right. So the other question that we talked about before we came on the air live is a personal brand statement. And I recently went through this exercise myself. So last week on episode 32 with Jennifer DuPont, I asked her that question. She said it's funny because I had that as an assignment in my master's program. So yes, I do have one. So go ahead and ask it. So mine that I came up with and everything that I'm doing right now, which I'm involved in a lot. I own a small business. I'm working full time doing this podcast. I work for payroll partners. And it's to create positive and meaningful experiences that inspire, uplift, and make a lasting impact on individuals. So, Neil, do you have a brand statement, personal brand statement, or do you have some kind of idea of what that would look like for
Well, I
yourself?
don't necessarily have a personal brand statement, but I certainly do have, I suppose, a motto that I live by, and it's
Yeah,
be useful. Everything that
yeah,
I do has to do with trying to be useful to people. When I started Teach the Geek, it was
right.
to be useful to technical people so that they can get better communicating in front of non-technical audiences. And everything that I put out, from my LinkedIn posts to my YouTube videos, the whole goal is to be useful to somebody. So if I were to live by
Yeah,
anything,
yeah,
it'd be that, be useful.
yeah. And you're on what, 8 years on the podcast? You've done 360
Yeah,
episodes, you said?
the 360th one that will be coming out in a couple of days.
All right. So it's released on
Yep,
Wednesdays?
Wednesdays.
Okay. Very good. So if you are on YouTube and you're not following Teach the Geek, definitely go out there and SpeakEasy HR. If you are watching live, obviously you are out there on LinkedIn or YouTube. But again, we are live with Neil Thompson with Teach the Geek. If you have any questions, if you're watching live, I know we have a few watching live, so definitely ask questions as we go along. But before we dive into your topic, Neil, just a couple of messages from our presenting sponsor, Payroll Partners,
Finding a new
and then we
employee
will
takes
get into it
time
here
and
shortly. So
money.
hold on one second.
For one position on a single job board, you could easily spend a minimum of $5 to $10 a day advertising a job post. It's worth noting that the average time it takes to hire a new employee is 36 days. However, it can take longer than that. You could find yourself paying hundreds of dollars a month for a single job board. And if you're using multiple job boards for multiple positions, this could add up to thousands of dollars a month. There is a much simpler and more affordable way of finding the right candidate. At Payroll Partners, we offer an applicant tracking system to help manage your hiring process. Our ATS is customizable, allowing you to decide which days you want to run the job and when to close it so you don't break the bank. And this feature lets you e-blast your network, posting jobs on multiple boards at once, all managed in one location. Payroll Partners, elevating your payroll and HR experience.
So, if you are in the world of payroll HR for your job and you're trying to make something better, more efficient, we have a system solution that can be customized from businesses from 2 to 2,000. So, wide range of businesses we work with. So, would love to connect with you in the future. If you are looking for new payroll HR technology, visit payrollpartners.net. So, all right, Neil. Well, we are going to dive into your topic, and it is about mastering leadership through communication, which everybody in a leadership role, communication is so important. And when you are living in a world now of remote work, hybrid work, in office work, such a different landscape in every business. We didn't have to deal with this before COVID. We didn't have to deal with people wanting to work remote, and that's all they wanted to do. So communication virtually, in person, it all is so different now. So what what led you to bring this topic to Speakeasy HR when I asked you about that and what topic you wanted to bring?
It started with my own struggles, having to give presentations in front
Yeah.
of management and seeing, at least eventually seeing the benefits of getting better at communicating in front of others. But frankly, I didn't want to
Yeah.
be that person who was disgruntled sitting in a cubicle or sitting at home remotely that thought that I deserved the promotion, I deserved the pay raise, but I didn't get it because somebody else was just better at communicating their worth to the organization. I think a lot of us, especially when we come into the workforce, obviously we don't know what to expect, but I think a lot of us think that our work will speak for itself. And it's so interesting. Even people I hear that have been in the workforce for some time still even say that. And I just think to myself, like, have you learned nothing? I mean, you're no spring chicken. You're not just out of school. Like, do you not see what's happening within an organization? It's the people, not necessarily the most technically gifted or the best of the best. It's the people who are able to communicate well enough to have the ear of decision makers. Those are the people who move up within organizations.
Yeah. So, how can professionals identify and develop their unique speaking style to build influence in their career, would you say?
Seeking feedback. I'm a big
Okay.
fan of people who, when they give presentations, they want to ask questions of people afterwards. Three of them are, I think, are important ones. Was this presentation understandable? Was it relevant? And was it actionable? And I think if you get answers to those questions that are satisfactory, you're on the right path. Especially for someone like myself who was an engineer having to give presentations. Those first few ones I mentioned were rough. I,
Yeah.
well, I know that they were rough because they had no clue what I was talking about. I was using a whole bunch of jargon that was clear to me, but obviously not clear to them because I get a whole bunch of questions afterwards. I mentioned that I thought I'd answered during the presentation. And I didn't put enough effort into putting those presentations together. I would slap slides together, get up there, read them, and try to get out of there as soon as possible. And in so many instances, I would include things that just weren't relevant to the people who I was speaking to. They're interesting to me, but I'm not trying to convince me. I'm trying to convince the people that I'm talking to about this project. So that was definitely something that I needed to get better at. And then the whole actionable thing. What do you want these people to do afterwards? I mean, they're sat. These are people, as I mentioned, these were executives that had to sit through meeting after meeting, presentation after presentation, a full day of all the projects that were going on in the organization. I suspect it was boring. You at least would like to know after each presentation what is expected of me as the person in the audience afterwards, as opposed to just this sweaty engineer, just reading a bunch of slides. And I think you can really develop your style by seeking that type of feedback. and getting those answers.
Yeah, that's really good. Really good advice. So, in your experience, Neil, what are some of the top communication habits that separate the good leaders with the great ones?
I think that they are listeners, and I think that when they communicate, they are thoughtful and clear. I think a lot of times when people think about communication, they're just thinking about the talking part, but there's also a listening part. Because if you don't listen, you won't know what kind of information you need to speak. I mentioned that I gave these presentations in front of management using a bunch of jargon, and they didn't understand it. If I would have listened, or even just go to them beforehand and
Yeah,
ask them what kind of presentation would I need to give for it to be of use to you, then I would get then actually listen to what the answers are. Well, I would have avoided using a whole bunch of jargon. I would have made sure that the information in it was relevant and made sure that it was actionable as well. So that's the one thing, is listening. And then being clear and thoughtful. I mean, when it comes to the clarity, that also ties into the use of all this jargon that I thought was clear, but
yeah,
obviously not. I mean, I, I worked in medical devices, I mentioned, and more specifically, I worked in spinal implants, and more specific to that, I worked in orthobiologics, which is using human cadaver bone to develop these spinal implants. There are a
hmm,
whole lot of terms that I would use that's common in the orthobiologic space that isn't clear to the average human being. Like words like orthobiologics, and other words like osteoblasts and osteoclasts, and this, interestingly, the group that I was a part of, this orthobiologics group, was new to the company. So with the exception of the people that were within my group, no one else within the company would know these terms. And yet here I was using them willy nilly, just expecting people to know, and they didn't know. So definitely being clear is super important. And then
yeah,
thoughtful with what you say too. I remember the one of the it was the CEO of this company at the time, and I was sitting in one of these meetings because I wanted to observe one of the engineers, one of the project leads, give his presentation. And afterwards, there was a back and forth between the COO and the CEO. And the COO, I don't remember what he said, but he said something, and then the CEO said, "Well, that's stupid." I remember thinking, I wonder what the COO is thinking right now after the CEO said that. So I think it's really important that when you're that top leader, or any leader really, you gotta be mindful of what you say to people.
yeah, absolutely. So, what role does storytelling play in leadership communication, and how can someone get better at that?
I think it's really important, and that's something that I came to understand eventually. When I was a member, of Toastmasters, it became clear, but it certainly
Yeah,
wasn't something that I thought about when I first started giving presentations in front of management. I just thought, get up there, state the facts, read them, get out of there as quickly as possible. But that didn't
yeah,
work out so well for me, hence all the sweating. So I think when it comes to the with storytelling, what you can do is try to couch all that data that perhaps a technical person who's in a leadership role would have to give in the form of stories, because when we were children we liked listening to stories. We liked when our parents read them to us at bedtime, but for some reason we get away from that as we get older. Perhaps we don't think it's appropriate, but if you really want to have a message be impactful, especially if you're a technical person speaking in front of non-technical people, storytelling is really important. And then in terms of
yeah.
how you can develop it, read children's books. And
And you
I
and
say,
and you've written one, right? You've written a children's book.
ha, indeed I have.
There you
Yeah.
go.
So what I like about children's books is that obviously they tell a story, but they tell a story simply. And if you were to actually read one of those books and read the fact that the story is told in a simple way, I think it can really help you fashion your own presentations to make them simpler. So so as opposed to using a whole bunch of jargon that people don't understand, simplify it. Use more commonly used words, for instance.
Yeah. Yeah, that I was going to ask you about your book, and I'm glad you brought that up. So what got you to write a book and be an author? And because storytelling, as you've explained, I mean, I think a lot of really good presenters are good at storytelling. And obviously, if they've written books, they know about storytelling and telling stories that capture people's attention and captivate them in their reading. So, what got you into writing a book,
Well,
children's book?
I had a nephew who was a very curious kid. The book is called Ask Uncle Neil Why Is My Hair Curly? It's about my
Okay.
nephew. It's about my nephew asking me why his hair is the way it is, and I use science to answer the question. So he actually asked me that question once. I have no
Hmm.
clue. I have no reason why he asked me that question, but I actually didn't know the answer. So I actually had to do some research to figure out what the answer was. And once I did so, I thought this could actually be a good idea for a book. And
Yeah.
so I decided, I'll write a children's book. And I self-published it. I hired someone to edit it. I hired somebody to design the cover and to do the illustrations. And then obviously, I wrote the book and I put it all together, self-published it, and then I sent a copy of it to my sister, who is my nephew's mother, in the mail. No one knew I even was doing all of this, so it was a surprise to
Wow.
quite a surprise to them.
Wow. How long ago was that?
That was 2018.
Okay. Very good. So, have you asked for feedback from people? Have people told you about it? And what are some of the, um, I guess, reactions to it from people that have written it? Have people given you some good feedback on it?
There are a lot of books out there about hair, but there's not
Yeah.
a whole lot of books about why hair is the way it is. So I
Yeah.
think that's been the biggest feedback. Is this? I really like the avenue that you took in writing this book is trying to explain scientifically and to as to children, so to make it readable and understandable to 8-year-olds and 7-year-olds
Yeah.
why their hair is the way it is. And the hope is that they are more encouraged to ask questions and get meaningful answers to those questions.
Yeah. So I am with Neil Thompson. We're live on LinkedIn and YouTube. So if you are watching live and have a question for Neil, throw them at us. Would love to hear from you if you are watching. Neil, what advice do you give leaders who are struggling, with public speaking or fear of being in front of an audience? What would be some of the advice you'd want to give them?
Think more about the benefits than the drawbacks. I mentioned earlier that if you want to move up within an organization, you got to be good at or effective at communicating your value. Think about that more than the fact that you're fearful of being up in front of people. And I think also think about the fact that other people are likely not going to judge you as harshly as you think they are because they may very well have that same fear and they'll look at you and think to themselves, at least that person overcame that fear.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how can effective communication help navigate through some of those tough conversations or conflict that someone might have within their team?
Well, I think you just need to be honest and you need to be
Yeah.
clear and just not make assumptions.
Yeah.
When I think of that question, I think about a post that I read years ago now, but it's still clear to me. There was a woman telling a story about one of a coworker she worked with, and she noted that he always spoke very slowly to her, and it would bother her.
Hmm.
And and then one time when they were at a conference, she finally, I guess, mustered up the courage to ask him, "Why do you always talk so slowly to me?" Because this whole time she's thinking that he speaks slowly to her because he doesn't think that she is deserving of his time or attention or she doesn't deserve to be there. He told her that he speaks slowly to everyone because English isn't his first language. So he wants to make sure that he speaks slowly so people understand him. Can you imagine if
Huh.
she had never asked him why he speaks slowly to her? She would have continued to think something that just wasn't true. And I think in
Yeah.
a lot of instances, with people, conflicts happen because we make these assumptions that may not be true. And if we were just to be honest and ask questions, we'd actually get answers so that we wouldn't have to make those assumptions.
Yeah. Yeah, that is it's tough, and if people don't ask the right questions, like you said, I mean, it could really change the assumption or the thought that someone has about another individual, especially people they're managing. And I think a lot of people that aren't a manager, they want to have clear communication with their manager. They want to be on the same page when they have projects and job functions that they're trying to get accomplished, and not be in a issue with performance, or not setting goals, or not meeting deadlines, things like that. So, what are some common mistakes you see leaders make, and how can they fix them?
I think a big issue is overpromising.
Yeah.
In a lot of instances, you want to try to appease everybody, but that's not possible. You'll never appease everybody. In fact, this reminds me of a networking event that I was at a couple of years ago, and I was speaking to an HR person over the crudité. So we were having this conversation, and I was telling her about I was telling her a story about one of my former podcast guests. And the podcast guest is a HR consultant, and she was doing work with a client, a survey on people's happiness in the workplace, and found that 76% of the employees were happy at the workplace. So I thought, well, is this celebration time? Break out the cake. And she said, no. What about the other 24%? And then so now fast forward to this conversation that I'm having with the other HR person at this networking event, and I told her the same story, and she said that on average, about 80% of employees at any given time are happy at the workplace, and you're always going to have that 20% that well isn't all that happy and want things to change. So I remember thinking to myself, well, they're only 4% off from the 80, so maybe they're 4% off from cake. So, so I mean, ultimately, if you're a leader and you're in a position to communicate with others, obviously, you don't want to overpromise what you can do. There's always going to be that 20%, it would seem, that isn't going to be too happy with whatever you do. So, I mean, at the end of the day, all you can do is do your best.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so important to have a process to get feedback from an organization, in from a real time, pulse feedback, whatever it's like, 5 or 6 questions on a quarterly basis, like, how are you feeling on a scale, or something, so that you have a good understanding of where your team's engagement is. Because I've seen some of the latest stats, and it's 73% are not engaged in their job. They're not happy. So, when you pull your team, and maybe they're not in a situation that's similar to the statistic, that they have more people engaged than other organizations, but you're always going to have people that are not engaged, and it's the organization's responsibility to find out why, and how can they fix that. And if they do get feedback, act on it, do something about it, be clear with the team, like, hey, we hear you, we appreciate the feedback, and we're going to share more about how we're using that feedback to align with the overall goals of the company. And if you do that with clear expectations and clear communication, like you had said, and not over promising, because the last thing you want is for people to ask for advice, and then everyone thinks that whatever they say is going to actually be reality in the future, where people ask for something because they're not happy in their job, like, what would make your job better, and then they give feedback, and then the company never does anything about it. So there is that side of it, where you want to ask for feedback, but if you do, people are going to expect things to change, and then it might turn into people that are, less engaged because they don't see change. So it's
100%, David. And especially if you have a large organization, the more people you have, the more
yep,
conflicting information you're going to get as to what needs to happen. So if that does happen, then what's the leader supposed to do? Is just, I mean,
yeah,
and then I think also it comes down to the culture. I mean, are we
hmm
all meant for all cultures? I mean, I'd say no. And if that's the case, well, then maybe it's just where you are doesn't match the culture you want to be in. And if that's the
yep,
case, you need to find a culture that's better suited to you.
absolutely. And that's why it's good to ask good questions in the interviews. It's good to ask about the manager. I always tell people when you go into interviews, and I interview, and I have an interview after this podcast. I'm talking to people about, con, I'm considering bringing them on our team, interviewing them for a job. They're going to come in and meet our managers. And rarely do I ever hear somebody say, "What's the management style of the person that I'll be working with?" How is it with how do they interact with their team? How do they engage with their team? How do they motivate their team? You never hear that. I don't.
Hmm.
And it's unfortunate because you might have the coolest company out there and everybody wants to work for them. But then if you have poor managers that can't communicate and they don't get engaged with their team and they don't know what motivates their team, you're going to have people leave. And that's the responsibility of the manager, is to really have that clear communication and have that skill set. So um Neil, what do you think, how do strong skills accelerate someone's career trajectory, especially in today's workplace, would you say?
And it's everything. As I mentioned before, David, you don't want to be that person who sees themselves as a leader, but you don't even communicate to anybody that you see yourself as a leader. You're waiting to be picked. But guess what? Leaders don't wait to get picked. the, the fact they are leaders because they carry themselves as that, and
Yeah,
people see it and people
yeah,
feel it, and they communicate it to others, so that even if those people, those decision makers, didn't know before, oh, they know now because
yeah,
because I said something. I mean,
yeah.
it's so interesting that there are people out there. I mean, I remember having this conversation with a woman I used to work with, and she's older than me. She's old enough to be my mom, but she was saying that when she was younger and she came to the workplace, she just thought, well, if I do a good job, I'll get promoted. It's like, no, no, that's not how it works. The people who are leaders, as I said, they're not waiting to be picked. They're
Yeah.
asserting themselves. They're advocating for themselves. They're getting in front of those decision makers and making that known what they want in their career at that company. And when that happens, though, why is it surprising that those are the people that get promoted into those leadership positions?
Yep. Absolutely. And they want it. They do need to want it. I think when I've had people complain about managers, people get promoted because they're good in their job and they're asked to be a manager and a leader. But if they don't want it and they just want the money, you're going to set them up for failure, and they're not going to be happy, and the team's not going to be happy. So anybody that's in the position of promoting people, specifically from a leadership level or manager level, like that individual must want it and want that responsibility to be a leader or manager in your organization. So um, can you share a moment, when communication made a significant impact and difference in your career, or someone that you've maybe helped coach or develop?
When I got better at being a better communicator, I was sent to present on a conference in Venice, and not Venice, California, the real Venice, Venice,
Ooh,
Italy. Yeah, I got to go to Venice,
wow.
Italy, and present at a conference. It was a fun time, and so the one thing I remember about that trip is I didn't even eat any pasta.
What?
No pizza, no lasagna, no spaghetti. I went and had Chinese food in Venice. multiple times. It was pretty good, but who goes to Italy to eat Chinese food? Neil
Wow.
Thompson does, apparently.
Neil Thompson does.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. So for people that are listening and looking to level up their leadership presence, what's one practical action that they can really take, in the next 30 days?
Be observant. Those leaders in your organization that you look up to, that you think are doing a good job of it. See how they move.
Yeah.
See how they speak to people. Are they clear? Are they thoughtful? Does it seem like they listen? I think and take notes, because at least if you're like me, I have a bad memory, so I'm not necessarily going to remember everything that I observe. So
Yeah.
walk around with a pencil and some paper and just observe.
Yeah. No, that is great advice, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I think people that are observant, they have that at a younger age, and it just develops differently. So people that are observant, that listen and not just talk, but really observe and really see what's going on with somebody, I think really becomes the next leader or manager in your organization. And the organization must see it too, for them to put that individual into that situation. And so that is a really good piece. And so I think when you talk about being observant, especially in today's workforce, where people are working remote, people are working hybrid, like I said before, working remotely in office, it's hard to be observant when you are trying to be focused on a conversation with someone, but there's just so much noise, right? There's so much outside noise, and you've got phones and everything, alerts going off, and things for email and chat groups and social media going. And it's like, so I see when people are showing somebody that they're being observant, they have their phone down, they have a pad of paper out, like you said, or they look like they're being observant versus like half focused and half paying attention, right? So anybody in a meeting, if you want to show people that you're being observant and listening to them, take out all the outside noise and try to be as focused on that conversation as you can. So Neil, anything else you want to mention about your current focus within Teach the Geek, or anything that's coming out in the future that you want to bring up?
Well, if people certainly, if people want to get in touch, they can go to teachthegeek.com. And then I mentioned that I have a podcast and a YouTube channel. And if you
Yeah.
want to know more about that, it's podcast.teachthegeek.com and youtube.teachthegeek.com.
Yeah.
Ultimately, when it comes to what I do, David, it's about helping people like myself, because I saw the benefits of what it did for me. Just not just being that engineer in front of his computer or in the lab doing experiments, but the person that was able to advocate for themselves to the point where now when I give presentations in front of others, I'm not bathed in sweat anymore. It's more of a
Yeah.
light drizzle.
That's right. No, that's awesome. No, that's great, Neil. I appreciate your time, and really enjoyed the conversation. And best of luck to you and your podcast and all the work that you're doing. And hopefully we'll keep in touch. And anybody that's looking to improve their skills, presenting wise and everything, I'm going to send them your way for sure. So really appreciate your time, Neil, and it was nice to connect to you. And hopefully we'll stay in touch. But hope everybody has a great rest of your day, and got some awesome guests coming up with SpeakEasy HR. So again, be on the lookout for all of those. And talk to you soon, Neil.
Thanks again for having me, David.
All right. Take care, everybody.